What is Gunlance? As well as all the different movements and properties of the weapon, there's something more core to what makes Gunlance special. All the weapons in Monster Hunter have some kind of fundamental identity. Some are more obvious than others, like the Greatsword. It's a weapon defined by patience and learning the monster's openings to unleash hugely powerful charged attacks. The Hammer is all about getting knockouts, similar to the Hunting Horn, which is also defined by its support role for buffing allies. This video will give you all the information and tips to either get started with Gunlance or enhance your understanding. It contains information that I haven't been able to find online, so with luck, even experienced Sunbreak Lancers should be able to learn something. So what does Gunlance do that's distinct from other weapons that gives it a unique identity? Well, it has three core elements that stand out. Number 1, the cutting pokes and sweeps. Number 2, the fixed damage shells. And number 3, the ability to block. The ability to deal cutting damage and block is much like the standard lance, a weapon all about careful timing of blocks, jabs and counters. The Gunlance itself lacks that level of precision, but makes up for it with the ability to deal fixed damage anywhere on the monster. The true identity of the Gunlance is a highly flexible weapon that can take advantage of any situation. Unlike other weapons, the Gunlance isn't held back by hit zones. Your shells will deal reliable damage no matter where you hit on the monster. If in doubt, you can hold up your shield to survive the vast majority of attacks, and your most powerful full burst combo contains a sweep that benefits from high hit zones. I will be referring to damage types, motion values, and hit zones, so I'm just going to quickly explain them before we get started. First of all, damage types refer to physical and elemental damage. The physical types are cutting, blunt, and projectile. The elemental ones are fire, water, thunder, ice, and dragon. Only cutting damage can sever tails, and only blunt can inflict stun on monsters when hitting the head. Hit zones are parts of a monster that will take different amounts of damage based on the type of attack. The amount of damage taken is a simple percentage of the total damage. So, for example, if your hunter swung a greatsword hit that would deal exactly 1000 damage normally, if the monster part you hit had a cutting hit zone of 60, you would deal 60% of that damage, and the final damage number you would get would be 600. Gunlance deals cutting damage with its melee attacks too, but its shelling attacks deal mostly fixed damage, which is unaffected by hit zones and even your raw damage. The damage numbers next to your weapon represent your raw, and each attack deals a portion of that damage. We call these motion values. The Gunlance's most powerful standard attack is the wide sweep, and that has a motion value of 68. This means it will deal 68% of your weapon's raw damage. Basically, big numbers good. Higher motion values against higher hit zones will result in greater damage. On top of that, there is a special modifier for enraged monsters. They will take an additional portion of damage from all sources when in an enraged state. This even affects the fixed damage portion of Gunlance shells. For example, Rathian will take 20% more damage while enraged. In Sunbreak, your most powerful sequence of attacks will be the full burst combo. You initiate the combo by slamming down your Gunlance and then hitting the shell button to unload every shell you have loaded for massive burst damage. You can then hit the melee button again to sweep, and proceed to quick reload your Gunlance by holding down the guard and then tapping shell. Keeping the combo going is simple. You hit shell plus melee to re-enter the slam, and you can start over again. If you have a big enough opening, you can keep this going as long as possible, or until a good opportunity to use Bullet Barrage arises. If you don't think you have time to finish the combo before the monster moves, you can hit shell after a full burst to unleash your Wyrmstake, should you have it loaded. Entering the combo can be achieved a number of ways. You can enter a lunging up thrust, and then hit shell plus melee to slam, and begin that way, or you can hit shell plus melee from a standing start to use Rising Slash, from which you can hit the melee button again to slam. Another key way of beginning the combo, or just getting a quick full burst in, is by holding down shell with Blast Dash Switch skill, and activating a more powerful slam with the melee button, from which you can immediately full burst. As well as the extra powerful slam, this method has the benefit of being effective against preventing weapon bouncing on certain hit zones, as both slams and the whole wide sweep have built-in Mind's Eye, meaning they will never bounce. Moving on, a popular style from World is poke shelling. You use the weak thrust attacks from pressing the melee button from a standing start, followed up by pressing the shell button right after hitting your target. You can combo these attacks together for easy and low commitment damage that is effective against strong hit zones. Do note that this playstyle is most useful with wide gunlance, which we will get into later. Normal and long gunlances tend to focus on full burst whenever possible. Poke shelling does suffer against monster parts like Enraged Rajang's arms when it comes to weapon bouncing. Although there are plenty of different combos and movements worth learning, the last essential combo that we will cover is the Erupting Cannon combo. This combo uses no melee attacks at all, but requires the Erupting Cannon switch skill from the Sunbreak expansion. To use it, just shell after any movement other than the slam with at least 2 shells and a Wyrmstake loaded. After the first shell, shell again. Now is the tricky part, shell again. Only this time, rather than a third uncharged shell, you unleash the Erupting Cannon. This is very fast, and the Erupting Cannon generally deals much more shelling damage than even a charged shell. And, in the case of wide, almost as much as a full burst. This combo is best on wide, okay on long, but not really worth using on normal. The Gunlance's movement is entirely different from previous entries. In terms of horizontal movement, it is arguably the most mobile in the game. Blast Dash is effective for chasing monsters. With your weapon drawn from a standing start, you can hold the shell button and immediately tap a direction to pivot towards it. From here, you can release the button when the Blast Dash is charged and go wherever you like. By holding shell during flight, you can chain up to 3 together. Holding guard plus shell will result in an instant aerial Blast Dash, and is useful for changing directions mid-air. A good place to aim for is just to the outside, behind the monster's hind legs. The best way to access Blast Dash with your weapon sheathed is by drawing into a lunging thrust, but cutting it short by charging with the shell button and then Blast Dashing. Another useful technique for moving around is charge cancel hopping. That is, you start charging and you hop. If you press and hold the charge button while hopping, you will start charging when you land and can hop again. This is particularly useful for chaining back hops together, which have a lot of range. To long back hop, you must have just used an attack or be in the middle of charging a shot. Hold back the left stick from the direction your hunter is facing, and you will take a big step back. By combining this with the pivot techniques mentioned earlier, you can approach monsters quickly with back hops and reposition with ease. Although different styles of Gunlance will have their ideal combos, a lot of the time you will not have time to use your best combo over and over again. Poke shells will always be very low commitment, as will the Erupting Cannon combo. Even getting in the occasional melee hit when there's no time for anything else will add up over the course of a hunt. So while you should always be on the lookout to take advantage of your strongest combos, you should also be fitting in whatever attacks you can to suit the particular moment. Regardless of style, there's also the Wyvern Fire that will deal a large amount of damage while shielding your hunter from the front during the wind-up. This can either be just a good burst damage option, or a handy defense tool depending on your level of the guard armor skill. If using the new sneak attack armor skill, all your damage including the fixed damage from shells will be boosted by 20% when standing anywhere that puts you behind the monster's midsection. This is a big increase to damage, and can potentially have a big influence on how you use the weapon. The higher the shelling level, the better, outside of pure melee builds. The difference between level 7 and 8 is around 20%, so aiming for a level 8 Gunlance is highly recommended. There are 3 types of shelling. 1. Normal. 2. Long. And 3. Wide. Normal is geared towards full burst, with all of its other features being lacking. Normal starts with 6 shells, but should be increased to 7 with 2 levels of the load-up armor skill. Long will do decent full burst damage and exceptional Wyvern Fire damage, along with a bonus to the number of ticks from Wyrmstake. Long begins with 4 shells and 5 with level 2 load up. Long also has improved range and will hit enemies further in front of you. Wide has the highest single shell damage and the highest damage with the Erupting Cannon. Wide only comes with 2 shells by default, and up to 3 with level 2 load up. Wide will hit enemies further to the side of you. Although the fixed damage portion of shells is unaffected by hit zones, all shelling attacks also deal a small amount of fire damage, with long type shelling benefiting the most. Most of the monsters in the game have some vulnerability to fire damage, although a handful have no fire hit zones above 0, meaning the damage will end up being entirely negated. You can check an individual monster's fire hit zones using the Hunter's Notes in-game. Please refer to the on-screen charts for detail, but as a general rule, every 10 points of fire vulnerability on a hit zone will add between 2 and 4% final damage depending on the shell and Gunlance shelling type. The most significant example would be for long shelling. At level 8 shelling, every 10 points a hit zone adds will increase your shell's total damage by 2.4. That's around 4% of the total damage for a single shell. Hit zones between 10 and 30 are fairly common, with just a few reaching 35 to 40. By the time you are shelling hit zones that are as high as 30, long shells will be doing 12% more damage. On the other hand, normal uncharged shells will only add 1.3 points per 10 or 1.4 as part of a full burst. But that adds up to at least 8% overall increase for hit zones at 30 or above. Don't think too much about the decimal places. If they are lower than 5, they get rounded down, higher than that, they get rounded up. Wide has the least benefit from higher hit zones, only adding 1.4 points of damage per 10 uncharged, and 1.3 points as part of the full burst, with only a 6% overall damage increase against a fire hit zone of 30. Without going too much into detail, Wyvern Fire benefits its overall damage by around 3% per 10 fire weakness for each shelling type, and Wyrmstake and Erupting Cannon benefit by about 2%. Long story short, it doesn't matter too much and is situational, but the fire damage from shells can be very effective depending on the shelling type and monster. I personally find it fun to aim for monster parts I know are weak to fire for extra damage. Fire damage related armor skills sadly do not increase the fire damage of shells, with the exception of Charge Master, which is a bad skill in general. The artillery armor skill does not increase the fire damage component, but sneak attack does, in addition to fixed. Switch skill swap, or SSS, is a new feature to Sunbreak which allows players to choose 2 different loadouts of switch skills, including silk binds. Although you can have 2 different loadouts, using Redirection will mean that you may not have access to the switch skills you want when you actually need them. With that in mind, I would recommend using identical loadouts for your 2 loadouts or scrolls if you are unsure. Redirection is an incredible new armor skill that turns your switch skill swap, activated with the Wirebug button plus shell and plus melee, into a special counter with a very small window. If successful, your character will take no damage and enter a forced backflip with very generous invincibility, making it effective even against multi-attacks unlike Guard Edge. Not only is Redirection free, but it will actually restore half a Wirebug upon successful activation. The main drawback is the extremely small window, which requires much practice. I'd recommend eating for Dango's Slider to restore a little health with each switch skill swap, as not only will this gradually restore HP, but it reduces the chance that a failed redirection will result in death, due to applying a small amount of extra health first. You can even activate Redirection without your weapon drawn. If it activates successfully, you will draw your weapon and backflip. We're going to move on to which switch skills to take over others. Charge shelling is really just not worth it, outside of gimmick stake spam builds. Just charge your shell, release the shell button, then hold back on the left stick and hit shell again to unleash a fast Wyrmstake. The damage for charged shells by themselves are just not worth it, and Blast Dash is an incredibly fun and useful skill, as discussed earlier. Quick Reload is necessary for the standard full burst playstyle, but Guard Reload has the benefit of reloading the Wyrmstake in addition to its 3 shells, whereas Quick Reload while replenishing all shells does not restore the Wyrmstake. Guard Reload is slower and does not combo into a slam, however it is useful for blocking attacks before you would normally be able to raise your guard. With the advent of Sunbreak, however, Redirection can accomplish pretty similar feats without having to sacrifice Quick Reload. Please do experiment with Guard Reload for Wide, however, and do try to take advantage of the additional guard frames. Guard Edge is in a similar position to Guard Reload in the sense that Redirection has somewhat replaced it in usefulness. By sacrificing 1 Wirebug, by holding the Wirebug button plus shell, you will enter a counter state, and if hit will regain a small amount of sharpness and be able to follow up with a faster than normal Wyrmstake with shell, or a slam with melee. Guard Edge will not protect you from attacks that hit multiple times. Reverse Blast Dash provides full invincibility, but only at the very start of the move, followed by a longer period of super armor but no damage reduction. Reverse Blast Dash has a Wirebug cooldown of 15 seconds, while Guard Edge has a cooldown of 16.5. As well as being very useful for making distance between you and the monster, you can also use it offensively, or fly straight into a monster attack. Just remember that lack of damage reduction. For all Gunlance Silkbind moves, you can dictate the initial starting direction, regardless of being mid-combo or not, just by holding a direction before activating the Silkbind. In the case of Reverse Blast Dash, you will go flying in the exact opposite way of the direction you chose. While in the air, you can follow up with the melee button to enter a more powerful slam, or you can hold A to enter a standard blast dash. You can also use reverse blast dash to achieve more consecutive blast dash beyond the normal limit of 3. Reverse blast dash can be a main damage option with normal shelling, and the super armor can be used to upkeep relentless attacks using the super armor. Erupting Cannon is generally better than Wyrmstake Cannon. While Wyrmstake can do much more damage, it just doesn't fit into the Gunlance's moveset as smoothly, and has no good combo potential outside of a highly conditional finisher. As well as the fixed damage explosion, it deals a number of cutting damage ticks that do not scale with any skills or your raw damage, but are still reduced by hit zones. Wide Wyrmstake is a little different, having only one tick and both portions dealing blunt damage that has the potential to stun the monster if attacking the head. Erupting Cannon has a reduced stun damage but still synergizes very well with Wide. The initial hit from the Gunlance while activating Wyrmstake or Erupting Cannon is also not insignificant, and so the added speed benefits that amount as well, which does scale with Raw, unlike the damage ticks from Wyrmstake. As mentioned prior, Erupting Cannon has high combo potential and is extremely flexible. The lunging up thrust follow-up can be pivoted to any direction, so is highly effective for chasing mobile monsters without having to reposition. There is also the small matter. The Erupting Cannon provides a 30% raw damage buff, which stacks multiplicatively with damage boosting armor skills. Bullet Barrage, Ground Splitter, and Hail Cutter all share the same switch skill slot and activation buttons, that is, Wirebug plus melee. Bullet Barrage is an absurd new silk bind that unloads every shell, your Wyrmstake, and Wave and Fire all at once. For full burst optimized playstyles, Bullet Barrage will normally be the best fit. It's a huge amount of burst damage. Bullet Barrage costs 2 wire bugs, with each one having a cooldown of 17 seconds, or 34 altogether. That said, mastery will take time. Before the Silkbind is ready, there is a reloading/cooling animation that will restore the Wave and Fire, shells, and Wyrmstake if they aren't available. This is useful because it means that you will get the full benefit of the skill, no matter what, even if Wave and Fire is on cooldown. However, the timing and monster knowledge necessary to hit with the skill and avoid allies requires much practice. After the reloading/cooling is complete, a wirebug will be thrust out in front of your hunter, and you will blast towards it. This does not use any shells, and once you get there, you will unleash all of your explosions at full damage. You will instantly set off any bombs as you pass through them, which will knock you out of Bullet Barrage. After a short period of forced movement, your hunter will stop with the next hitbox they collide into. As you will stop upon contact with the monster during the later part of the blast dash, this means it is not possible to super armor through a monster's attack that makes physical contact, unless during the first phase of the move, which includes the cooling and early part of the blast dash. Projectiles will be super armored through regardless of phase. There are 2 movement cues which dictate which direction Bullet Barrage will go once the cooling is over. Like other silk binds, when you first initiate Bullet Barrage, you can pick any direction with your left stick, and that will set the initial direction you'll be heading towards. While the cooling animation is ongoing, and before the wirebug is thrust out, you can correct your angle by up to 45 degrees on each side of your initially chosen direction. This means your starting direction should be chosen based on predicting where the monster will be within a 90-degree cone from where you are standing. If the monster stays within that cone, you can correct your angle during the cooling. Ideally, you should be aiming for the parts of the monster without fellow hunters, which will generally be the areas with poorer hit zones, the back, body, or legs for example. Areas like the head and tail have a high probability of a hunter moving in front of you as you blast towards the monster. Not only is Bullet Barrage extremely powerful, but it provides complete super armor and 70% damage reduction, meaning you can time your attacks to tank enemy supers while other hunters are likely to be running away. If you are using a wide Gunlance, Bullet Barrage will be considerably weaker, and you may prefer to take Ground Splitter instead. Ground Splitter is a 1 Wirebug Silk Bind that does moderate cutting damage with the second half of the attack, and can be followed up with a fast Wyrmstake or Slam. Most importantly though is the 30-second 20% boost to shell damage. With a cooldown of 30 seconds, you can keep it up indefinitely. But even with Redirection and Wirebug Whisperer, it can be challenging to upkeep Ground Splitter and use 2 Wirebug moves like Bullet Barrage or Hail Cutter. Also bear in mind that if you're thrown by an attack and you have to use the escape function of Wirebugs, you will lose the buff. It's challenging to upkeep it, believe me. Hail Cutter is another 2-wire bug skill with a cooldown of 8 seconds per bug and 16 overall. Hail Cutter can be used on the ground or in the air, and fully replenishes your shells and lowers your Within Fire cooldown by 1 minute and 15 seconds out of the default 3 minutes 30. With the Artillery 3 Armour skill, it reduces the Within Fire cooldown to at most 25 seconds. Used from the ground, you do decent damage on the way up and high damage with the smash, from which you can full burst. Hail Cutter is an interesting alternative to Bullet Barrage, but lacks the super armor, damage reduction, and underperforms overall. However, it doesn't require the same kind of commitment, and you'll be less likely to completely miss. Some builds will have a lot of fun with this skill. All armor comes with Armour Skills and Decoration slots, which you can use to customize your individual build or set. First of all, Load Up at level 2 will provide an extra shell for each Gunlance type, which is essential. It means more damage from full bursts and extra flexibility in general. Artillery will increase shelling damage by 30% and halve your Within Fire cooldown, and is highly recommended. Evade Extender is also useful. Depending on your preference, any level of it is good, and will be a large boon to your movement. Guard will increase the efficacy of your shield, with Guard Up allowing you to block normally unguardable attacks. Evade Window is an interesting alternative if you'd rather dodge than block, but if you're using Redirection, which requires 2 levels to be really useful, then Evade Window does not increase the success window. If you rely heavily on Redirection, you may not need Evade Window or Guard. Sharpness management of some kind is also important, so look out for skills like Protective Polish and Speed Sharpening. Defense Up is always handy, and Weakness Exploit is the first offensive skill after Artillery should you want to increase your cutting damage. Bear in mind, shells cannot crit, so any critical skills will only affect your melee damage. Sneak Attack is very powerful, but using it can change how you play the weapon pretty significantly. There are plenty of other skills out there to experiment with too. Please have a fun time trying out different builds. Now, although faffing around in game to cram in as many armor skills as you possibly can is also fun, you can use player-made armor set searches, like the one in the description, to help fit even more skills into your set. The most noteworthy Rampage skills come from the anti-species decorations. These decos increase shell and overall damage by 5%. Dragon will work for most monsters, and Aerial will work for any monsters that can fly, including most Elder Dragons. For fluffy, non-dragon looking monsters, there's Fanged Exploit, and finally for the aquatic monsters you have Anti-Aquatic. Anyhow, that's more or less it for this video. Please leave a comment below if you notice any inaccuracies. I aim to release future editions of this guide should new information become known, or new updates drop that affect aspects of the video. I stream on Twitch. I am not a YouTuber. Please click on the thing to reach my Twitch channel, and feel free to ask me questions in real time, or just come along for some fun Gunlance gameplay. I stream at midnight UK time. If you'd rather not, but still have questions you'd like to ask, then just ask them in a comment or something. I've tried to cover even basic info that pertains to Gunlance, but left other basic features relatively unexplained. Please do not hesitate if you need advice, or believe something should have been included in the video. Thanks for watching till the very end. So long for now, and happy glancing! Bye-bye.